Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards.
If you're listening to this podcast, then you're in great company. We've got thousands of listeners who have a thirst for continual improvement and raising standards in business. Whether your interest is in quality, sustainability, or risk standards, I'd love to welcome you as a member to our online platform for all things ISO, the ISology Hub. The ISology Hub is the leading place to get access to all of your online resources, from in-depth training courses through to our very popular coffee break training, to templates and action plans and many other resources to help raise standards. As a member, you get access to over 100 courses, taking you from learner to practitioner to leader. The ISology Hub has all the resources that you need, which will really help to make your life easier and to help improve compliance in those business critical areas. So if you'd like access to learning and compliance resources ranging from data privacy to environmental management, anti-bribery, business continuity, quality, health and safety, to name just but a few, the list is endless actually, then we'd love for you to come and join us. Just head over to the isologyhub.com.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of the ISO Show. I'm Ian Battersby, Senior ISO Consultant with Blackmores UK Limited. Good to be back, always a pleasure to do these, and provides a bit of a chance for me to do something a bit different, but also learn quite a bit at the same time. Today I'm going to talk about what I call the real purpose of management review and the fallacy of the annual event. I did a little Q&A session with one of my colleagues, Sarah, on management review not so long ago, but it's a subject always worthy of more time and something that is possibly a subject misunderstood in many ways. It's an essential part of every management system. It's there in black and white, you must do management review. But I feel many people misunderstood what its real purpose is. We have to do it in line with specific requirements which are written into the standards. And failure to do it can have repercussions, detrimental effects to your certification process, unfortunately. So it's always worth getting it right. But just doing it in line with the words which are written down may not do it justice. Is everybody doing this well? Is anybody doing this well? There are a number of common misconceptions around management systems and around the management review process in particular. And misconceptions regarding management review vary, covering such things as it's just a formality, we're here to rubber stamp things because the standard requires that we do it. It must be once a year. It says you do it once a year, doesn't it? There's an idea sometimes that the minutiae of every audit finding, every continual improvement log entry, every customer feedback form, every supplier verification form should be analysed and judged and reported at management review. Some people think, we ought to go through the risk assessment and the opportunities assessment at every meeting and rejig our scores. Or we should look at the SWOT and PESTLE. Or we should review certain documentation at that meeting, or rewrite the policy. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a place, and indeed a need, for many of these things, but there is also a time. So why do we do management review? When you read why we do it, it sort of reveals much more about whether we're doing it well or not, okay? Go back to leadership. Leadership is fundamental and is central to many things we do. In clause 5, it says, in every management system standard, top management shall demonstrate leadership, excellent, and commitment, great, with respect to this particular management system by A, taking accountability for the effectiveness of that system, B, ensuring that resources needed for that system are available, C, ensuring that the quality management system, or whichever system, achieves its intended results. Now, they're quite grand statements. Being accountable for effectiveness is quite challenging. Ensuring that the resources are required is challenging when you look at the resource elements of the standards. And ensuring that it achieves its intended results. So there's a lot to go out in just those 3 lines. There are many more aspects to leadership. I've just pulled out the 3, which I think are very pertinent to reviewing performance. And then we skip straight down to clause 9.3. So in order to take accountability, management review is required. And top management shall review the organisation's management system at planned intervals to ensuring its continuing suitability, adequacy, effectiveness and alignment with the strategic direction of the organisation. So top management are responsible for making sure that it does what it's supposed to do. So they're responsible for making sure it's created in order to meet the organisation's requirements, and they are responsible for making sure that it does that. Now, along the way, between the beginning and the end of standards, top management have a number of responsibilities over things. They are there to ensure that the context has been determined, and that as part of that, interested parties' needs and expectations have been evaluated. They have to ensure that the risks and opportunities that are arising out of that context have been assessed and that objectives and policy have been established on the back of that and aligned to the business. They need to ensure that support in terms of the people, resources, competence awareness, and communication have been adequately provided in order to maintain the management system. They have the responsibility for ensuring that the management system's operations run effectively through the right processes, the right responsibilities and roles. And then they have the responsibility for ensuring that all of that is monitored to make sure it is done correctly. And as part of that, the last part of that, management review appears. Management review needs to consider many elements from the preceding clauses. And many of those elements, as I've just said, have implications throughout for top management. So what does the management review clause say? Top management shall review the organisation's management system, planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, effectiveness and alignment with the strategic direction of the organisation. All sorts of things are required. But note from the very outset, it says planned intervals. It doesn't say you should do this annually. It doesn't say you should do it monthly. You could say, I'd like to do it in January, June, November and December. You could say, I'd like to do it every 26 days. You could say, I'd like to do it in the summer months, less so than in the winter months. You could say whatever you want, as long as that is relevant to the purpose of your management system. So there are all sorts of things written into this particular requirement, but not when you should actually do the management review. Now, there are sensible reasons for doing management review in certain ways and at certain frequencies. Now, depending on the scale, the nature of your organisation and your business, the risks associated with it, the maturity of your management system, the needs and expectations of your customers, and the legal framework in which you work, you ought to set a management review period quite frequently in some circumstances, but not in all. I am used to working in organisations which have a grand management review process once a year, where the entire senior management team, board, top management, as the standard calls people, in order to review what has happened in the last year and set the scene for the coming year. Now, that doesn't necessarily involve huge amounts of detail, but it does meet the requirements of the standard in many ways. But also, I'm used to that same organisation having a monthly meeting with the same top management to keep them abreast of issues arising and being resolved in that period of time. So if we go through the requirements of the standard, look at things which meet both that regular or that slightly less frequent method of monitoring. Just because I used to be in an organisation which did it monthly doesn't mean that that's the way to do it. As I said, it's got to be relevant to your organisation. Some people do a quarterly version of the management review. Some people do it 6 monthly. Some people just do it once a year. Where people split it over the year, some of them decide that they would like to consider certain elements of the standard in 1 month of the year, and then other elements of the standard in the next meeting, and cycle through the management review throughout the year. Now, if we look at the types of things which are required in management review, what fits into what category? When would you consider certain things? When do you really want to look at them in detail, and when do you want to look at the high-level picture, the top-down look? So, as I said, there are lots of requirements for management review. In clause 9.3, it's got things which should be included for consideration. It's got outputs as well. Okay, so what goes in, what comes out. In the inputs, the first thing you look at is the status of actions from previous management reviews. This is quite important. If you're going to have any meeting which monitors performance in any way whatsoever, and that's a cyclical meeting, and you've said you're going to do something in one meeting, at the next meeting, you really, really have to consider how you're doing against what you've said you're going to do, whether it needs to have been completed or whether it's only partially completed or in train at the moment. The management review literally has to say, how's it going with what we said last time out, whether that's an annual meeting or a monthly meeting. Secondly, have to look at changes in external and internal issues which are relevant to the quality management system. This is context again. Doesn't mean that at every meeting you should sit down and consider the SWOT, PESTLE, interested parties table and go through them in detail and reassess everything. But there must be some determination at some point of when that is to be done, and when a senior management discussion should include any key aspects of what's included and what the impact is, or any direction from senior management as to what needs to be considered in the future because of changes in strategic direction and in the context, the world in which the organisation lives. So if you're holding an annual management review, you don't necessarily sit down and go through this sort of thing. But you do have to consider the key issues which have arisen out of any reviews of that information in the year. Now, what the standard says is there is a need to review such documentation at determined intervals and also when any changes affect the management system. Organisations change all the time, so this is a sort of thing that should be kept on quite regularly, not a one-off event. So context documentation should be moving with the organisation's changes. Now, the next thing to be an input to a management review is information on the performance and effectiveness of the management system, including trends in certain things. Remember that word, trends. It doesn't say discuss the detail, go through line by line everything in continual improvement log. Things which need to be looked at in 9001, for instance, customer satisfaction and feedback from relevant interested parties. Okay, now what you don't want to do at every management review is necessarily sit down with every customer feedback form and read through it. But what are the trends coming from your customers? What is it that you've learnt by looking at them in the round as a whole? What the root causes of issues coming from them are? Another issue, the extent to which objectives have been met. Now, if you were to do an annual management review, this isn't the only point at which you would be looking objectives, please tell me. You don't want to wait till the end of the year to discover that your objectives aren't on track. So there should be a mechanism throughout the year to monitor that objectives are progressing as you believe they ought. And if they're not, what are you doing to get them back on track? If you need to reschedule, if you need to adapt them, if you need to implement new objectives because context and risk has changed in the year, that should be done as things happen, not at the end of a year. And if there is a body which is specifically overviewing a governance arrangement of some kind, which is overviewing objectives, the setting of them, the progress on them, the monitoring of them. That should be written into your monitoring arrangements so that management review requirements in the standards are addressed. You don't have to have one meeting which covers everything. You have to have a review process which demonstrates it meets the requirements of the standards. If you were to have an annual review, you could say, this is what happened in the year. This is how we tracked progress against objectives. Here's where we are with objectives. Also, process non-conformities, performance need to be looked at. And again, if you're having an annual management review process, you don't want to be looking at the detail of whether processes were effective or not. You want the review overall of how the monitoring of process has thrown up improvement activities, how it has changed the way you operate, how it has demonstrated that all your products and services are turning out as you expect them to be. Non-conformities and corrective actions also need to be looked at, and they are stemming from process performance, from audit, and from any other monitoring and measuring results. Again, if you are having dozens, hundreds, thousands of non-conformities and corrective actions, these need to be considered as they arise and in manageable amounts rather than at an annual review. Again, it says trends in these things must be considered. And audit results. It's fine at an annual review to indicate how audit went and what the general findings were and how many findings there were of particular types, non-conformities, opportunities for improvement, that sort of thing, and what the general learning was from those. But again, you don't want to be reading through 5, 10, however many audit reports there are in a year at a management review. You could look at the detail of individual audits as they arrive in a month if you are having a more regular management review cycle. And also, the performance of external providers is something that requires performance information to be input to the review process. Now, again, depending on the number of providers you have, it may be information that you don't necessarily want to pore over in detail. But the trends and the learning from that must be input into your review process, and it must be considered by top management. Now, the next requirement of an input is that the top management should look at the adequacy of resources which are applied to the management system. Now, when you look at the standards and clause 7 on support, there's an awful lot regarding resourcing, and this is the type of content from the standard that needs to be looked at when you are doing management review. Resourcing covers the capabilities of your organisation, whether you need to look at external provision, the people, their competence, the infrastructure of the organisation, the environment in which things occur, the monitoring and measuring resources you have and whether they're adequate, the knowledge you hold within the organisation, the awareness and communication you provide in order to support that, the hosting systems, the SharePoint, wherever it might be, where you put all your documentation, the other support systems and whether they support the delivery of service. So you cannot underestimate really how much could be considered in the adequacy of resources. So it deserves certainly some serious looking at. The effectiveness of actions to address risk and opportunities comes next. And this isn't, again, looking at individual items of risk and opportunity at every meeting, or certainly not at a management review, which is conducted annually. This is about looking at the overall picture, whether the objectives you've set actually have driven improvement activities where you can measurably reduce the risks, where you have reassessed risk and shown overall that risk has reduced, or on the flip side of that, whether opportunities that were identified in the risk and opportunities register have actually been taken advantage of. Where did we actually set an objective and we can show improvement activities against that objective which have actually taken advantage of the opportunities which we've identified. So again, not every level of detail, but certainly the broad picture on whether risk and opportunity has moved in whichever period of time is your cycle for management review. And then another vital part of this is opportunities for improvement. Again, there isn't an expectation that an entire continual improvement log should be considered at every meeting. But the learning from that, the root causes which underlie the reasons why you need to improve need to be pulled out and analysed, and the scope of things which have actually been put in place, what it may have cost to do that, but what the benefits of doing that are. So they're the inputs into management review. There are outputs, okay, and there is a need for decisions to be made. Now, the outputs from this could be all sorts of things, but there are requirements in the standard for that. But while I said earlier that it might not be, certainly not at an annual event, something where you will sit down and consider documentation and policy and all these sorts of things, there is a need for a body to oversee arrangements for review and update of policy, procedure, whatever it may be. The management review is a good body for doing that, but it should not be there to consider in the greatest detail all the content. There should be a process for reviewing in advance, bringing the findings of things to the meeting. If it's a simple policy document, not reviewing the policy document, considering a review which has been done of a policy document at a meeting is perfectly viable and is a good way to do things. And having a meeting sign off that it's accepted, that it is the correct thing, is a very good thing to do, potentially. But other things which could be agreed at a meeting are, if you've looked back at the year's audit results and the findings from them in the management review meeting, you could look forward to the next year and decide where to target upcoming audit programs based on your knowledge of what's happened in the year. Okay? You may have looked at the finding from objectives and how well they've gone in the year and plan on how you wish to set objectives for the coming year. You may look at the learning from your continual improvement log for the year and what the underlying causes for improvements were and target activities to cover those off in the coming year. So they are things that are perfectly acceptable things to do if dealt with at the right level of detail at the right frequency. Another output from management review is the need for any changes to the quality management system. Changes could be changes to context. So if the top management conduct management review and consider that the organisation has changed or its interested parties have changed in their needs and expectations, then this is an opportunity to direct what those changes might be. If there is a need to change the way systems run, if there is a need to change the people involved, if there is a need to raise awareness, if there is a need to run different improvement programs, this is the opportunity. But what exactly are those changes? And the third thing, which is an output, is looking at resource needs. And I've just touched on that. And I touched on earlier that the standard is full of requirements regarding resourcing of management systems. So you should be referencing back to what it is that a management system requires in its development and maintenance and carefully understand what the resource needs are, because that's an essential output from the management review process. Now, there's quite a lot of detail in that. I understand it's a difficult thing to get your head around when it's not all written down in front of you. But hopefully the approach makes sense to you. The idea that the way you encompass the requirements of management review is quite flexible. It doesn't have to be a single meeting per year. It doesn't have to be one meeting per month. It can be an adaptation of what you already do in other governance meetings that you have. It's a very forgiving clause in the standard in that respect, because it says at planned intervals, and it tells you what you need to look at. And it tells you that you don't have to look at detail, you have to look at trends and things like that. So hopefully that's a good pointer, really. Read the standard in detail. Hopefully my words have helped for you to understand what it is that they're really looking for. But hopefully not just follow the real words of the standard, but the meaning of it around effectiveness of your management system, because that, at the end of the day, is what this is trying to measure. So that's all from me again today. Hopefully that's been interesting, useful, giving you some ideas. Before I go, I can just remind everybody, please subscribe on your favourite media player to this channel if you've not already done so. Please also, we love to get feedback. We love to get 5-star reviews as well. If you could please leave us a review at some point, it'd be really helpful. This also helps us to reach out to a wider audience as well. As always, we welcome any questions. So if you've got any questions or suggestions for us on future topics or anything like that, feel free to get in contact. Either send us an email or comment on your media player. We'd love to hear anything back from any of you. So that's all from me today. Thanks for listening, and hopefully catch you up soon on the next ISO show. Goodbye.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.